relate to first?
Oh, man.
Just line number, whatever.
Man, we have some recognizable names here, one of which will be saved for last. Actually, let's do the number 6.
Line 6. Matt, you are on with Dragnauct and Matt. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm exceptional.
I just had a couple of questions for you that I'd like to ask, and it's great that you have the scientist guy on there because it has to do with the collection of evidence and how one would interpret it as it relates to miracles.
Cool.
Okay, so I've heard you say before in debates that if one was to want to posit a miracle as an explanation for something that took place in the distant past, that they would have to see miracles happening now. Would you agree with that? Or that they would have to be demonstrable? Like
no, I don't think you would have to see a miracle now in order to confirm a miracle in the past. My answer is okay. I have no idea how one would go about confirming a miracle either in the past or now, but certainly it's more difficult if you're trying to analyze a miracle claim from long in the past.
Okay. And would you say that, like, if miracles did happen on a very regular basis now and were repeatable scientifically and things of that nature, like, from a science perspective, would a scientist see something that is, supposedly an anomaly in science, and they were to see that it's repeatable, would they then determine that if they couldn't explain it, that it was a miracle, or would they just call it like an unexplainable natural phenomenon?
If there is a phenomenon that is happening that is inexplicable, right, that we can investigate, then I hate to break it to you, it's not supernatural. So calling it a miracle.
So you would agree that?
Well, the big thing, so there were a couple confusing things in there because it sounded like you said something that was refuted by science. Is that what you said? Or
no, repeatable.
Repeatable.
Like repeatable science.
So we have we have
do tests on it.
I'm trying to understand. You're talking about a phenomenon that is occurring that's repeatable. First of all, we don't define thing as inexplicable because that's a declaration that it is unexplainable, and that's different from unexplained. And so when we observe something and we don't currently have an explanation for it, we keep going until we get an explanation. And at no point does our absence of an explanation mean that we get to say, that's a miracle.
Okay. So, like, if it was the case that you, say, witnessed maybe 10 or 15 people throughout the course of, the last 150 years or so who died and then were, resurrected, and this could be demonstrably proven by science.
Happens all the time.
The dead.
Happens all the time.
Okay, but I mean, like,
people. No.
Like after a public execution.
Okay.
Like somebody's beheaded.
Yeah. So we behead somebody, and then 3 days later they're up and walking around, and we've had them under we've had them under proper test conditions where we're observing them the entire time. Yeah, that'd be really incredible. Do you have anything remotely like that?
I know, but my question is, if that was the case, would a scientist then say, "Oh, well, we're going to call this a miracle"? Or
No. So hang on. Let's get off the miracle label because that's irrelevant. What would happen is a scientist would say, "Hey, we have a dozen accounts now that are well documented of someone having their head lopped off and then getting up and walking around 3 days. Do we have an explanation for that? No." And until you have an explanation, you don't get to claim what the explanation is. And that goes not only for the scientists who are exploring it, but for the non-scientists who want to claim that it's supernatural. Because supernatural is something that you need to demonstrate.
It would not be ever called a miracle then, right? You would just say...
Somebody would call it a miracle. What difference does it make? Somebody's going to call it a miracle now. What difference does it make if they call it a miracle? What we're talking about here is, can you demonstrate supernatural causation or not?
And the answer would be no from your perspective, I assume. Is that correct?
Has anybody ever demonstrated a mechanism by which we can confirm supernatural causation?
No, of course not. I mean, I also don't think that it's
then we're stuck.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm not saying, here's the thing. I'm not saying that that's the case forever. Maybe tomorrow somebody will come up with a way to demonstrate that the supernatural is real and show how it can interact with reality and how we can test for that and confirm it. But until that happens, we're stuck.
Now, as that relates to the situation with Jesus and the resurrection and all that, I'm a Christian, so I assume you probably knew I was going there.
But I mean,
if that was the case.
But let me ask you, do you disagree with the conclusion that I reached right there, that until we are able... Okay.
I mean, I would feel comfortable positing a supernatural explanation if the person who died and rose again was like, okay, I'm going to die and rise again, and then they did it, and they said God is the mechanism by which this took place, I would actually feel, comfortable taking their word for it. But
see, that's actually a huge mistake, because if I told you that I could levitate in front of you, and then I did it, and then I told you the reason I was able to levitate is because I am in fact God, and you're comfortable just accepting that, you would turn out to be wrong.
Not levitation. I mean, if you were like demonstrably dead, though, like if I witnessed you be killed in a public execution,
okay, sure,
then risen from the dead, that'd be a little bit different. Would you agree?
It would be different, but I wouldn't necessarily accept their claim about it, because that's not confirmation. That's still just a claim. The question I have, though, is you're a Christian, and so,
yes.
And so on some level, you are accepting a claim that somebody died, resurrected, and gave credit to God when you don't have any evidence that any of that actually happened.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that there's no evidence that it happened. I mean, there's numerous, like witnesses that testified to it.
No, we have no witnesses that account to it.
Like, so Paul is not a witness to the resurrection?
Of course not. Paul didn't know anything about Jesus until after Jesus was already dead.
So if a being, right, just like appeared in the sky, right, and blinded you, okay, if that was the case, hypothetically, and then this being communicated with you and said, I'm Jesus, I'm risen from the dead, all these things, you'd be like, no, I don't believe you.
No. See, this is the thing that you're missing out on. If that happened to me, if some being appeared to me, then I might maybe have good reason to believe it, but nobody else would, because revelation is necessarily first person, according by Hume, and to everybody else it's hearsay. But you're not just going on secondhand accounts. You're accepting a story for which you can verify none of the details, including whether or not the person who's relating the story, you even have an accurate description from them of their account.
Would you only be willing to believe a miracle, like on the testimony of another, if the person was alive, or would you be willing to accept?
I wouldn't believe a miracle on testimony. I wouldn't believe a miracle on testimony. I would believe that somebody is...
You would have to see it yourself.
Can I finish?
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely.
I would believe that someone is accurately trying to tell me what happened, but that doesn't mean I should believe their explanation for what happened. And that's a first-hand account. Do you believe people are being abducted by aliens?
No.
Okay, but you realize that there are people you can talk to right now who will tell you their alien abduction story. That's not supernatural. Yeah. It's not a miracle, and yet you're willing to discount their personal testimony, and yet you will accept a copy of a translation of a copy from somebody who don't know, can't investigate at all. You're willing to accept that that is sufficient evidence of a risen person.
Do you believe some news stories and not other news stories?
I asked you a question.
Every news story.
I'm
perfectly comfortable with it because I have spent a lot up actually.
Your turn, because I have no interest in speaking with somebody who's perfectly comfortable with dismissing. Shut up, I'm talking. With dismissing some firsthand accounts that are not particularly extraordinary or less extraordinary, and accepting.
I wouldn't necessarily discount all of them.
Okay, so your issue here is that you're relying on personal anecdotes. Do you see that?
Well, I mean, it would be personal anecdotes from several different people.
That's fine. So,
multiple sources.
Do multiple anecdotes equal empirical evidence? How does that work?
No, of course not. No, okay. I don't think you can prove a miracle in the same way you can prove science.
Okay,
I think it's ridiculous to suggest that one could.
Now, you would admit that empirical evidence would trump anecdotal evidence, correct?
Well, of course. Yeah, I mean, it'd be better evidence, but it doesn't mean that the other thing didn't happen.
Okay, so while I agree that some anecdotes can actually be true, it can actually reflect reality, but that's contingent, right, based on what we see in reality. Have you actually seen someone be resurrected, like actually be beheaded? Personally, have you?
No, of course not.
Okay, so then...
But I think that if it was the case that it happened enough times throughout history where everybody got to see it, it would be so commonplace that it wouldn't really be accepted as
that is a load of bullshit. That is absolutely a load of bullshit. Because even if it becomes so commonplace that it's no longer extraordinary, like if people were being killed and resurrected daily, that fundamentally does not mean that it would be dismissed in the case of the resurrection that you prefer. This isn't
Jesus' resurrection would remain unique if it happened on a regular basis.
Okay, so now you think it's unique, And
no, I'm asking. I know, I believe it is unique. I think Jesus is the only person who's actually experienced the true resurrection in the way it's described in the Gospels.
Really? So you're dismissing when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and you're dismissing the dead when the dead rose on Jerusalem when the curtain was torn?
He died after. Yeah, no, I mean, Lazarus died after, and everybody else.
After what? After what?
Well, he lived. It's not as though he lived forever, right? He's not like alive now. He still died again. It's kind of like I'm a paramedic, and if we get like a resuscitation,
you are now officially. I wish I had a crown to give you as the king of post hoc rationalizations. You are dancing around, and every time I point to a problem with your belief, you just go on to something else. Oh, Jesus is the only person. Shut up. Shut up.
Okay, sure.
Jesus is the only person who experienced resurrection. What about Lazarus? What about the dead that rose in Jerusalem? Well, Jesus is the only one that experienced resurrection and stayed alive. So you have no existence. You have no evidence that Jesus existed. You have no evidence that he was killed. No good evidence. Sorry, I mean, of course you have anecdotal accounts in the Bible. You don't have good evidence that he was resurrected, and you don't have good evidence that he's still alive.
Well, I mean, you'd have to kind of define good evidence because, like, what kind of evidence?
We literally did that earlier.
Yeah,
we literally
been
did
there, done that. Basically, the evidence that you're presenting is shit.
Well, according to you, but my question,
according to reasonable standards of evidence, and also, by the way, according to you, because you don't believe people's testimonial accounts that they're being abducted by aliens, you are creating a special case scenario where you are accepting testimonial accounts that aren't firsthand, that you can't verify, for something that is more extraordinary than the claim that people are being abducted by aliens. You are the one with flawed standards of evidence, and this is obvious and demonstrable.
Well, if it was just out of curiosity. If it was the case, right, that somebody was being abducted by an alien, right, and I didn't witness it myself, it's not that I would automatically discount their testimony. I would have to see how did it affect their lives, what kind of corroborating evidence do they have, how many witnesses really were there, and are these witnesses consistent with what I should expect?
Have you bothered to look?
About the alien account or in terms of the resurrection?
About the alien abductions. Have you bothered to investigate them?
No.
And yet you don't believe them. And yet you don't believe them, and you're willing to dismiss them.
Out of hand. I mean, I just haven't looked at it. If you presented one that had the same...
I'm not here to try to convince you of this, because I don't believe they've been abducted by aliens. I don't believe they've been abducted by aliens either. See, one of us has good standards of evidence, and so is not believing these extraordinary claims. The other one has shitty standards of evidence, and so you're dismissing some extraordinary claims and believing more extraordinary claims.
Well, I'm not dismissing them. I'd have to take it on a claim-by-claim basis. Just like you believe some news stories are not other news stories, I'd have to take it on a claim-by-claim basis.
These aren't news stories.
I know, but I'm just saying, in the same way that you would verify a certain news story and disbelieve it, or verify a news story and believe it.
Yeah, how do we verify the resurrection account?
Well, the resurrection account would be on eyewitness testimony.
You have no eyewitness testimony. There are no eyewitness accounts of eyewitness accounts of the resurrection. Paul is not.
So Paul and James.
Paul is not an eyewitness to the resurrection. He claims to have witnessed the risen Jesus after the
after he was dead.
Yeah, he's not a witness to the resurrection.
Not a witness to the resurrection?
Correct.
How can somebody witness Jesus alive after he was dead but not be a witness to the resurrection?
That's a lie.
First of all, he didn't witness a bodily Jesus after the resurrection. If you want to go that route, you would be talking about the apostles that Jesus supposedly appeared to in a bodily form, where even doubting Thomas supposedly wanted to stick his fingers in the nail holes. But instead, you go to Paul. James? What about what?
James, the Lord's brother.
Okay, I have a story in a book that references that. I have no evidence beyond the story.
How much evidence would you expect beyond the story than what we have?
How much would I expect? Okay, that's a really good question. Because if there was a God who came down and took human form and sacrificed himself to serve as a loophole so that to save everybody, and expected people to accept this on good standards of evidence, then we wouldn't have anonymous hearsay accounts with no ability to verify it. That God should be smart enough to make sure that there is solid evidence to confirm the accounts, so that I can't poke holes in your thing the same way I poke holes in flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and other garbage beliefs.
So just out of curiosity, So just out of curiosity, as it relates to that, like the standard of evidence and the things that you're asking, or the things that you were saying, are you suggesting that God should have multiple resurrections occur over the course of history?
It's fine to have just the one. It's fine to have just the one, but provide good evidence for it.
But it has to happen later when everybody can investigate it scientifically. Is that correct?
Wow.
I'm asking an honest question because I want to know. I mean, I
answered your question, but I'm going to let Drag do it.
So the issue here, I think it's maybe a better question. What would disabuse you of this belief? Hypothetically.
If you could find, I guess it would take, I don't know, maybe like a hostile account saying that they actually witnessed Jesus not having died, like actually themselves, like a first-hand or second-hand, account that was.
Wait, so you're saying a report that somebody didn't die?
No, but I'm just saying in this situation, right, where they could demonstrably prove, it's something from the distant past, though. It's not really the same as something that can be investigated scientifically now. So what I'm trying to understand is, if you were to believe that a resurrection happened, it would have to happen now, and it would have to happen.
No. Stop, Matt. I did not. You keep stop and shut the fuck up for a second. When I say stop, just stop. You keep trying. I swear to God, you interrupt me one more time, and I'm going to hang up. You keep saying things like, you would expect it to need to happen now. And I've said no to that repeatedly. What Drag is asking you right now is, here we have an account, a biblical account, of a man who supposedly died and supposedly was resurrected. And you're accepting that account at face value, and he wants to know what would make you no longer accept that. And you come back with, oh, so you would expect it to happen now. No, bye. Jesus. Give me the evidence for the account. And then to answer Drag's question, it would be, what would change your mind? What would convince you that you shouldn't believe this?
Right.
Because everything we've tried has failed. When we say, okay, do you believe in alien abductions? No. But they're more plausible, and by your own standards, the resurrection of Jesus is unique.
Right.
Alien abduction stories are not unique. So they don't require anything necessarily supernatural. By definition, they are vastly more probable or likely.
Yeah, it's weird how, his skepticism seemed to kick in when it involved aliens. Like, his personal credulity is really interesting. It's almost like there's a bias toward wanting to believe this particular narrative.
You'd think so. It's weird. So this guy, I actually recognize his questions because he emailed in sometime in the last week or so. And he thinks that he's calling in to trap us.
Does he?
Because his line of argument is, the sort of evidence that we would expect and accept to confirm a resurrection would render resurrections mundane. It would mean they would have to be occurring now all the time, and we would have to be able to investigate them. And if that's the case, then there's nothing unique or special about Jesus' resurrection, because it would just be another one of many.
Okay.
And that our bias towards good evidence means that we could never confirm something in the past.
Yeah, see, there's so many issues with that. If I was, let's say, and I think we spoke about this, if I was a philosophical naturalist, I could see that being a problem. But as a methodological naturalist, right, I can still entertain ideas of the supernatural. I can still entertain the existence of things outside of the physical realm or whatever. But what I've yet to actually hear is a way to investigate supernatural claims, because he isn't unique in his arguments. It's just like, I believe this, other people believe this, and other people said it happened, so yeah, you should just kind of believe it. And it's not convincing, no matter how many mental gymnastics you need to do in order to get to that point. It still does not hold water.
It's funny that when you asked him, what would disabuse you of this belief?
Very simple question.
It's a simple question, not necessarily an easy question.
Fair enough.
Especially if you don't have a good understanding of epistemology or standards of evidence. How do you know what you know, and how is it reasonable? But he went to, well, if somebody would show me that he didn't die, which I immediately jumped in on, because I'm like, that's more miraculous, I would say, than the thing you're actually advocating. There's a guy who has never died. He's on 6th Street every night. I had a debate in Red Deer, Canada, and I asked my opponent, people keep wanting me to ask this in debates, and I don't always do it, but I did in this case. What would change his mind when it comes to the resurrection? And his answer was, well, if we found a tomb that had Jesus's body in it. And I loved that answer because it shows everything about how he's thinking, and caller Matt is thinking exactly the same way.
Right.
Because, first of all, you are presuming that Jesus actually existed, and mythicists are going to challenge you on that, and you have no way to demonstrate that he did. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm fine with the notion that there may have been a Yeshua ben Joseph who was an itinerant rabbi who said some things and maybe got killed. That none of that's extraordinary. But you're beginning with he definitely existed, and so if we were to find his tomb, that would mean he did not resurrect. Except, how would you ever verify that you found that particular Yeshua's tomb?
Right.
And it's not like we have DNA to verify. And this is why it's especially strange that if there's a God who wants people to believe this, why did he do it 2,000 years ago when we didn't have any ability to record anything, any ability to investigate, as far as DNA and all this other? Why not do it now?
Right.
Or maybe 100 years in the future when we have even better investigative methods?
Yeah.
Why is it that miracles drop off as our ability to investigate them increases? That seems rather strange to me.
It's really strange.
Vern actually shared a meme the other day that I loved, which is like it's going along miracle claims, and then the invention or the discovery of scientific methods, and then it declines, and it goes along here at zero, and then photography, and it jumps back up, and then Photoshop, and it drops back off. It's
weird correlation there.
Or something along those lines. But yeah. And so the guy that I was debating in Red Deer, you don't have the ability to test to determine that body. But he set up a scenario that is unfalsifiable. And that means that he set up a scenario where the only thing that will change his mind is something that can never happen. And Matt's doing the same thing because Matt is essentially saying, I'm going to believe this until you prove me wrong. And it almost doesn't even matter whether or not there's a way to prove him wrong or not. That's already a mistake. To say, I'm going to believe this. And what he said at one point, which we didn't really get into, was he's like, well, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And you're correct. We're not saying that this dearth of evidence means it didn't happen. We're saying that the absence of all this evidence means we cannot be rationally justified in claiming or accepting that it has. I don't need to claim Jesus wasn't resurrected. I don't need to prove it. I don't even need to believe it. My position is I'm not convinced that he was.
All right. How do we investigate any of these things? And so I've yet to have any type of metric where a theist has offered for me to investigate supernatural claims. So maybe there's a supernatural, there's a meme, but supernatural methodology or something. I don't know. Like I open that up for them to I guess, contrive at some point in time. But I think we need a palate cleanser after that.
All right, where are we going now?